Spartan King Leonidas and 300 soldiers in 480 BC held up the Persian army here. In 1941, Winston Churchill was romanced by the notion it would happen again. He later said he did not give up hope of a final stand at Thermopylae. Every student of ancient history knows the story of the famous Spartan stand. Many of the Australian soldiers who passed this way, themselves barely out of school, knew it well. But strangely enough, what isn't taught today is the story of our own Spartan stand and our own Spartan, who's now a retired accountant living in Melbourne.
Well, the pass itself was a zigzag of road up a very steep hill, and we were parked. We had the guns dug in on the forward edge of the road, sort of over the edge of the gravel, and that was the only spot we could find anywhere on the pass to put them.
The action of the two Australian guns at Brallos Pass has found its way into local folklore. Two men from the village of Brallos took me to where the guns were sighted.
Κανόνια, αυστραλέζικα κανόνια. Μπουμ, πολύ καταστροφή στους Γερμανούς. Και μετά φύγανε οι Γερμανοί από εκεί και πήγανε από εκεί για να μπορέσουν να περάσουν πέρα. Γιατί εδώ δεν μπορούσαν να ανεβούν απάνω, είχαν πρόβλημα, ήταν πολύ... Από εκεί θερμοπύλ κάτω. Εκεί ήταν θερμοπύλες πιο κάτω.
That's Thermopylae.
Yes.
The objective was to hold up the advance so the remainder of the Allied force could be evacuated. It was a suicide mission. The guns were sighted in full view of the Germans on the plain below. But remarkably, night and day for 21 hours they held on, with enemy artillery raining in on them.
We got fired back at by guns that fire a 100-pound shell. We heard the sound before the shell arrived, just briefly, for about half a second. It was just enough for you to duck before the shell arrived.
The noise is almost unbearable on the eardrums.
One shell must have landed right amongst them. And when I got back from taking this fella up the hill and ringing through, we found that we had another 5 killed and another couple injured.
The two guns at the Brallos Pass probably enabled thousands more Allied troops to get away. 12 Hurricane aircraft had a similar role. They were sent up above Athens to face as many as 200 German planes. Roald Dahl filled out his logbook for what might have been the last time.
I mean, you're doing this all the time and up there and then glancing in your rearview mirror like a car. Because they're on you in 1 second. And you also, you never stop in a battle like that. You never fly straight and level for 3 seconds. You're turning this way, turning that way, and you really wait. There were so many of them that all you had to do was wait for one to come across your sights. And then you had to pop at him. you sweat like anything. You get, it's tension. You're not in the least frightened. You're absolutely wound up. And minutes go by as though they're seconds, you know. Nothing counts except this amazing battle you're in. It is amazing. I'm glad I was in it, actually.
Drivers who steer their trucks by night through mountain passes get the forces back to the coast, clear of the Germans.
The rear guard enabled the majority to get away. They set about immobilizing some of the 8,000 discarded vehicles.
They're spared the Dunkirk ordeal of daylight evacuation from Bombay.
The Greece evacuation was Dunkirk or Gallipoli without the glory. The Anzacs evacuated quite literally on Anzac Day, leaving behind a proportion of their pride and too many of their men, including some wounded.
So aber sitzen sie beisammen, die Briten und ihre Helfer, ihre verratenen Helfer.
Soldiers seriously injured in the fighting were left to carry another wound.
There was no effort
whatsoever made to get us out. Nobody tried an inch. Everybody was too busy heading the other way. I don't say the infantry blokes themselves, because I think they went back and took up another position somewhere, but the powers that be, surely they could have organised a gang of blokes with trucks, anything, wheelbarrows to come and get us and take us away. But there was nothing, not a sound. We were left just like a lot of old blown out motor tyres. They left us there. And that annoyed me, by Gad did.
But most of the Australians got away. Some 6,500 were deposited here on the island of Crete alongside evacuated New Zealand, British and Greek servicemen. The Allies had to prevent the Germans from capturing any of the 3 airstrips on the island. A collaboration of New South Welshmen and West Australians were camouflaged and waiting in olive groves around the airstrip at Rethymnon. The peaceful Cretan landscape offered only a moment's reprieve. Germany's plan to conquer the island and secure their southern flank was known in detail by British intelligence. On May 20, the Germans arrived right on time.
6:10 Uhr. Vor uns Kreta. Die Nervenprobe für Besatzung und Springer beginnt. Im Tiefflug überfliegen wir die kretische Küste.
First of all, there was this noise like a great swarm of bees, it seemed to me, looking back on it, just before you could sort of more or less sense rather than saw, and then way out in the distance you could see this great black cloud, as it were, very indistinct, but then the noise and the throbbing grew louder, and it was obvious it was a great armada of aircraft of all descriptions.
Die Maschine steigt und stürzt in Hitzeböen.
This was the world's first major aerial invasion.
Da, die Flak.
And this time the opposing forces were more evenly balanced.
Eingepercht in die Kabine.
The German soldiers were better armed than the enemy below, but the Germans were outnumbered. And in the air, the lumbering transport planes were easy targets.
Da, ein Motor setzt aus. Der Mittelmotor ist es. Öl spritzt auf die Scheibe, behindert die Sicht. Auch das noch. Fertig machen!
We were the first ones to go to Rethymnon, and we were suddenly noticing that we were shot at. All sorts of calibers, and some of our comrades were hit. One of them before me was hit in the head and was dead.
The parachutes opened. It was an incredible sight, and it was almost beautiful. And we sort of stopped and said, "Look at that!" And then we suddenly realised what it was. It was paratroops. Everywhere you looked, there were these parachutes coming down.
It was, you just didn't take any, you were petrified for a moment at this colossal scene of all these colours. And I think really everyone was sort of bloody stunned and speechless.
We were delighted to leave the aircraft because we thought they couldn't hit us as easily as they could in the aircraft, but that was not so. In the air I heard this whistling of bullets around me, but the whistling is not so bad to hear because you know everything you hear is already past you. It can't hit you anymore. And then I looked down and I saw some soldiers
There were sort of legs dangling just right above you and without small arms, and those legs were Jerry's, and they were actually shooting from up there and flinging down hand grenades as they came.
I didn't know at that time they were Australians, so just shooting at me. And, well, I was very glad I didn't land in the middle of them, but some 20 or 30 yards off from them.
And this German soldier came along with one of his automatic small arms, and he was obviously out after Johnny Learmont and I. John had 2 rounds in his service revolver, that's all he could scrounge. But Johnny just sort of caught him off guard, and just with one shot, he got him right through the heart. And he just fell in a heap in this little sunken road. Poor devil, had ginger hair. He laid there for days and days and days.
I've never seen a human being dying before that. And that was on the first day already of our battle. And after that, of course, we have seen every day dozens and dozens dying and lying there dead. We couldn't bury them, of course, during all this time. It was practically impossible.
We were able to collect our dead and bury them reasonably soon after, but it was difficult, and for days the bodies of the German dead, and of course and there's nothing like that sweet, sickly smell of rotting human corpse and flesh. It's everywhere.
Den Verwundeten gilt die ganze Fürsorge der mit abgesprungenen Sanitätssoldaten.
If by now Anzac honour needed redemption, then redemption was to be found at Rethymnon. The smell of death was not all that was reminiscent of Gallipoli. The combatants also abided by the same old-fashioned notion of fair play, not seen later in the war. Both sides fought till the last, stopped to tend their wounded and bury their dead, and then, just as fiercely, fought on.
Their fighting was extremely fair. And I have, during the last war, and served for 3 years during the war in Russia, and I was in other parts of the war, and I must say this fairness which existed between the Australians and the Germans in Australia has nowhere else existed.
After a week of fighting at Rethymnon, the Australians had won, but elsewhere on the island, the fortunes of war had swung against them. The Germans were able to take the other airstrip at Malamy from the New Zealanders and bring in enough reinforcements to secure the island.
Unglaublich die Ruhe der Männer trotz feindlichen Artilleriefeuers. Eine unerhörte Leistung des Flugzeugführers. Das Artilleriefeuer scheint nachzulassen. Nein, da, neue Einschläge! Der Feind weiß nur zu gut, was weitere Landungen für ihn bedeuten würden. Aber schon schweben weitere Maschinen ein. Der kühne Einsatz der ersten Ju erweitert sich zur planmäßigen Landung weiterer Maschinen. Wohl werden viele von ihnen mitsamt ihrer tapferen Besatzung...
I said, oh, look, there's all our tanks and things coming along. He got his binoculars out and he said, no, they're not our tanks. And then as he was speaking, I could see great black crosses on those things.
Bald stehen ihnen 100.000 Kameraden zur Seite.
Actually, we were quite surprised because we had always expected the opposite to happen. We thought it might take another fortnight or so to fight there, and then we might have to surrender or shoot ourselves. That was what we expected. And on the 30th of May, the Austrian and Bavarian mountain troops arrived, and I think this was the most beautiful day of my life.
Die kampfentscheidende Luftverbindung mit dem Festland ist geschaffen und damit die Voraussetzung für das Gelingen des Unternehmens Reta.